Hello, people. In this week four, today we'll be discussing famous African American poet Phyllis Wheatley. Um, Phyllis Wheatley was born either 1753 or 1754 in either one of the West African countries of modern day Senegal or the Gambia. She was enslaved at an early age, and she was taken by a ship or schooner called Phyllis to Boston, Massachusetts, where she was sold um, into slavery by a merchant named John Whitley and his wife Susan Whitley. The Wheatleys, they basically had a liking for Phyllis at an early age, where they named her after the schooner that brought her, Phyllis. She was able to learn how to read and write at an early age by their daughter Mary, where she learned the Bible, the language English, French, and Greek. Basically, though, her upbringing, I would say she personally had a privileged upbringing, basically by learning to read and write, and she didn't have to do too much domestic work compared to other slaves. Um, by 1765, she was writing poems. But it wasn't until 1773 that her one of her well-known works, which was called um, Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, um, and was published. The poem that was published that year made her the first African American to publish a book about poetry. She became the first African American to basically publish a book on poetry. Her work was acknowledged by people like including George Washington and Jupiter Hammond. I might be saying that name wrong, where he published her work on a poem of his own work. Um, Phyllis had other writings, including a letter to Reverend um, Samson. I can't say the last name, where she criticized his ideas and beliefs on how slaves should be um, given their rights in America. She also exchanged letters with British philanthropist John Tolton. In 1775, she had a copy of a poem entitled "To His Excellency George Washington," which she sent to George Washington. A year later, though, she was invited to his headquarters in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to meet with him. Basically, I'll say about the poem. Um, um, she was later emancipated and gave out freedom by the by the Whitleys. Um, in 1778, she was married to a free black man named John Peters, where the couple would eventually have three children together, but all three died during um, infancy. Um, in 1784, her husband would be in prison for debt. Um, that same year, though, Whitney she would die in poverty and illness on December 5th, 1784. Um, So, especially, this not being a famous poet, she would die in poverty and sickness. So she basically had pretty much a very tragic end of her life, if you can say that. Despite her work being well known as the first African American to publish a book on poetry and made an accomplishment, she was mostly criticized by other black literary scholars, especially in the 1960s and 1970s. You have to kind of understand the 60s and 70s was the time of the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement during that time. Um, um, for example, much of the criticism that came for our work was a failure to identify as a black enslaved person, basically because since she had a very privileged upbringing by the Whitleys, she and didn't really associate with many other slaves there. Her thinking and views were different from other slaves, and I was I finna get basically in one article that I read, I found a source, which was by Elinor Smith, titled "Phyllis Whitney: A Black Perspective." Smith give major criticism to Whitney about her blackness, where she mentioned that she asked a question on there in the article saying, "Did Phyllis Whitney do anything to sustain and participate blackness and give a rise to black people?" Smith basically argues that Phyllis Whitney was a black woman who would talk about whites to think white. Basically, Smith was critical of Whitney and her upbringing, since she was had a well liking for among the Whitneys, and she was taught to read right early age by them, and basically her upbringing, I think, was a way to seen as not being non-friendly compared to other slaves that have a different viewpoint and their position in slavery. So basically, what Smith is trying to get into is that that Whitney, had a white upbringing, and she was pretty much privileged compared to other slaves that was among her, because she was able to read. Like I said, she was able to read and write, be well educated. So that was one of the main factors, pretty much, what she was trying to get into. How I finished when it applied to historian Laura Techer, how Bessie Ross become famous is what she mentioned, that how she mentioned how Bessie Ross was see a safe and not controversial outcome, can still see same thing with Phyllis Whitney as being like that. Just like I was mentioning, how upbringing and how she was educated by a white thinking and all, and not social with other slaves, and have more privileged background, was something that really they can look into. And it's more I can talk about this, but I know I can't make the video. It'll be kind of long, but I hope y'all enjoyed the video and y'all have a good day.